Hashem Naaseh v'Natzliach, which for anyone who doesn't understand Hebrew, it means in the name of God, we will do and we will succeed. Anytime you start anything, you always want to involve God in it. Why? Because it's a good partner. The goal of this shiur is to establish not faith, but knowledge of God. And one of the most difficult things that the people of everywhere, every country, not just Israel, have is knowledge of God. Many people believe in God, but most don't actually know that He exists. And in Judaism, if you see in the Torah, most of the times when God says that He's God, He says you need to know that He's God, not believe that He's God. In other religions like Christianity and Catholicism, which in essence are one and the same, or even in Islam in general, you're supposed to believe. In Islam, they don't really have an explanation for a lot of the things that happen, in the world. So they say it's in the hands of Allah. Everything is in essence predetermined by Him. The difficulty with that is that if it's really in His hands and He pretty much determines the outcome of everything, then we're all robots. Then why would anybody get upset for somebody murdering somebody else? It's in the hands of Allah. Why would anybody get upset if one country conquers another? It's in the hands of Allah. Why would anybody get upset about anything? Why would there be any laws? If it's really only in His hands and we have no choice. Believing in God, and purely based on faith, is very vulnerable. Because believing in God puts you in a situation where you make God into something like a Santa Claus, where if you're nice, you get gifts, and everything is great, and life is wonderful, and if you say a few extra prayers, and you wear a few different, bands or whatever is in style these days that people sell, most of which has nothing to do with Judaism, has mostly to do with capitalism. If you do nice things, and then you're supposed to get whatever it is that you're seeking for, whether it's a partner, or it's a lot of money, or it's a longer life, or whatever it is that you're looking for. Most people are looking for money, women, power. It's generally life. So faith is very vulnerable, because if you don't get what you want, and you did all the extra prayers, and you wore all the extra strings, and you did all the weird things that people tell you to do, and you don't get what you want, then the Santa Claus version of God doesn't actually work. So maybe it doesn't exist. Knowledge, on the other hand, is a confirmation that He has to exist, and whether you receive what you want or not is irrelevant. Whether you agree with what He says or not is irrelevant. Whether you do what He says or not is still irrelevant. He's perfect with or without you. The question is, how do we establish knowledge of something that we can't confirm with our five senses? We can't see Him. We can't hear Him. We're not Moses. He's not talking to any one of us individually, at least not to my knowledge. If He talks to any one of you guys, you should probably give the shiur. Can't hear us. We can't hear Him. Can't speak to Him. Can't touch Him. Can't taste Him, can't smell Him. So how do you know something exists without using your five senses? Now, every creation in the world, whether it's the table, or it's the iPad, or it's anything else that exists in the world, has always been created for a purpose. Nothing was ever created or built with no purpose. No one has ever, built a table, and when you ask them what is this for, and they say, I don't know. Obviously it has a purpose, to put cups on it, to put food on it, to put books on it, whatever it is, there's a purpose for every creation. The car is obviously used for driving. A plane is for flying, and everything else that's ever created has to have some type of purpose. Now the design itself is, the more sophisticated it is, the more sophisticated the designer. So, for example, the guy that built this table is not as sophisticated as the guy that, let's say, for example, built this building. And the guy that built this building is not as sophisticated as the people that put the city together. So the more sophisticated the design, the more sophisticated the designer. So the one who put the world together obviously has to be more sophisticated than everybody else. Which means that there's nothing that the least sophisticated designer could do or know that's superior to the one that's more sophisticated than him. It always gradually increases. So if someone that created, let's say, something as simple as this phone in my hand, they came up with instructions. Why? Because they wanted us to not only know what this is, and not to use it as a cup holder, but they also wanted us to use it as best as possible. Because without instructions, we may be able to figure out what it is, but we won't know really the details of how to use it most effectively. So since the guy that created this iPhone, which some people say it's Steve Jobs, some people say it's employees, whichever one it is, the key is that he's not as sophisticated as whoever created this world, this universe. So of course, if he has instructions, the one who created the world has to have instructions. So last week we talked about the beginning of the Torah, because Judaism claims that the Torah was given to us by God, by the one who created the world gave us this Torah. Now, the New Testament, written by the Christians, came after the Torah. They call the Torah the Old Testament, and they claim that the Old Testament is correct. It's valid. Why? Because without it, they wouldn't have a New Testament. Their book, in essence, is a continuation of ours. At least that's what they think. We don't agree with that. But they don't disagree with the Torah. Neither does Islam. Islam also says that our book is the first one, and their book, the Quran, is the second one. Continuation. Meaning that the two other major religions of the world, which consume the vast majority of the world, don't disagree with Judaism. And with the book, that's pretty much the foundation of the world and the foundation of Judaism. So we don't really have much to defend ourselves against those religions, because technically if our religion is fake, then that means that theirs is also. So we can't be fake and they be real. But we can be real and they be fake. The only thing that we battle is two possibilities. As I said earlier before I turned the camera on, it's either people that don't believe, so it's atheists, people that think that everything came from a Big Bang, through some type of explosion, or whatever other way they conjure up to justify life, or the people that just don't know. They don't know whether he exists or he doesn't exist, they don't know whether this is real or not, they just don't know. Now the common denominator out of all of those people is that none of them have ever read the Torah from beginning to end and actually understood what it says. Meaning that no one has actually completed reading this book. And I don't mean just read it with just the literal translation. There's a little bit of interpretations of, the people that will tell us how to understand. This is not a literal reading like a Harry Potter book. So to actually understand the Torah takes a little bit of work, but if you spend a few months on it, you could read the whole thing. And just by reading it, you see that the Creator and His creation are so extraordinary and so perfect that it's impossible for it to be a man-made creation. So last week we talked about some of the things that are written just in the first few pages of the Torah. We'll go over some of it today because most of you guys are a new crowd, but we'll go over some of it and then go over some new things that will continuation. We're not going to go over the entire first chapter of the or section of the Torah because it's too deep and there's too much to cover. But again, the point of what I'm trying to do here is to establish a little bit more knowledge that at the very least this cannot be a man-made creation. So the Torah starts with Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz ve'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. So it says, in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and a divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. In so many words of the Torah, the Bible is starting with is telling us that before God created it, there was nothing but Him. The Zohar actually talks about how before God created the world, He actually created several other worlds, 6 other worlds. This is the 7th world. They all reached their maturity. This is the 7th world and the last one. But before that, it was just Him. And He had to minimize Himself in order to make space for the rest of creation, the rest of His creating. So now, when God tells us that without His Torah, without somebody in the world learning Torah, there's no possibility that the world would continue to exist. Meaning that He's trying to tell us right in the beginning of the Torah that the purpose of the world is to learn Torah. The purpose of the world is for us to do what the Torah says. So the first thing we talked about last week, which we'll go over briefly today, as far as something scientific that will get you thinking a little bit, is if, let's say, for example, God forbid, everyone in the world decided to stop learning Torah for a moment. Now, when everyone thinks of destruction, biblical destruction, immediately they tie Noah. Noah's, which is the next parasha. Say it's Noah, the people of Noah's generation were very bad, they were very evil, they did everything and anything they could possibly do against what God demanded, and God decided to destroy the world. Now, this whole process was 1 year long. The flood, the first flood, the first rain was 40 days, then it took over the next few months, but in essence, the whole flood itself was about 1 year. So when we think of a biblical destruction, we're thinking that at the very least, we have 1 year. So if God decides to destroy the world, it'll take Him 1 year, as if He needs that much time. When God said that if there's no Torah for even a moment, He didn't say that it's going to take Him 1 year. He said that if for one moment there's no Torah, the heaven and the earth, the rules of the heaven and the earth will cease to exist immediately. What are these rules? One of them, and the most important one in essence for us to exist and for anything to exist, is for the atom to continue spinning. Everything in life, as Einstein said, is energy. Everything is energy. When you break down everything, whether it's this table, or it's me, or it's you, or it's the world around us, everything can be broken down into atoms. Now, if you look into the atom, you see there are 2 balls. There's the nucleus, which is the bigger one, stays stagnant, doesn't move. And then there's the electron that spins around it over and over and over again. Now, the space between them is so big that it's the equivalent of between us and the sun. Really, really big. Meaning that most of the atom is completely empty space. 99% of it is empty space. Scientists have succeeded going even inside the nucleus, the part that doesn't move, and discovered that even inside the nucleus, there's another part that's spinning, and that part is mostly empty space. 99% empty space. So even the part that we thought is a little bit, is the 1% of space, is really most of that is empty space. Meaning that most of everything is empty space. So how can we see each other? How can we see the building and the trees and everything looks as if it's solid? Imagine a fan. The fan keeps spinning really fast and it looks like it's one blade. But once you slow it down from number 1 to number 2 or number 3, you see that it's slowing down and it appears like it's 2 blades. And when you stop it, eventually it becomes 4 blades. It was always 4 blades. You just saw an illusion, an optical illusion that made it seem like it was 1 blade because it was spinning so fast. The difference between the fan and us and everything else is that the fan, in essence, is something solid in our eyes. But everything else around us, including the fan, is really not solid. It's really empty space. And if that electron, that ball, stops spinning, the first thing it's going to do is the only thing it's going to do. It will expose the darkness. It will expose the empty space. You will see the single blade. But since the single blade, if you will, is only 1% or less than 1% of the entire thing, that means that everything would just disappear. There wouldn't be a destruction, there wouldn't be a war, there wouldn't be an earthquake, there wouldn't be winds, there wouldn't be anything that you see in the movies. There would be nothing. It would just cease to exist. Because technically, the only thing that keeps it spinning is willpower. That willpower is the best answer for any atheist in the world, because that willpower is not connected to an electric outlet, that willpower is not connected to our hearts, that willpower is connected to nothing. Something keeps that electron spinning, and so long as it spins, we continue existing. If it stops spinning for a second, we cease to exist. No sickness, no headaches, no wars, no guns, no nothing. One scientist came up with the conclusion that there's so little matter in creation that if all of the atoms just stop spinning in all of the universe, what's left everywhere would all fit into a box of matches. So there's that little left of what's actually exists. So that's the first way we understand that there has to be something that's above us, that's beyond us, that's beyond our comprehension, that's beyond our intellect, that's beyond our ability to even begin to understand. The only thing we could try to understand is this creation's instructions. So the first thing we have to figure out is, how do we know that this is really his instructions? The second thing we talked about last week, but we'll go over again, is that in the second day, God said, "Vayim avdil ben mayim lemayim." When he was, in essence, after he created light, not the sun or the moon, but just the first light. It's called the hidden light, Or Ganuz. God said, "Let there be a firmament," which in essence is the sky, in the midst of the waters, and let it separate between water and water. So in essence, there's two skies. There's the sky that we see, and there's a sky above the sky. There's the rest of the universe. That we can understand because that science classes told us early on that we have it. But then one thing that he said in the same verse is that let there be a separation between water and water, meaning that there's two waters. There's one water here, which we all know where it is. It's in the ocean, it's in the lakes, it's in the cups, it's everywhere. Where is the other water? Last time I checked, they haven't discovered water in Mars, they haven't discovered water in Pluto, they haven't discovered water on the moon, they haven't discovered water anywhere. Now our sages tell us not only is there water above this water, but the water above this water is much more significant in quantity and significance as far as importance to us and to our existence than the water here. Now 73% of the world we live in is water. So we know that the most important thing that we need for existence is water. So God made it so that the thing we need most, we have the most of. We don't have to pay for it. Unless we want to pay for a bottle. But we don't really have to. Now, we see where the water is here. There's a lot of it. But God is telling us that there's a lot more. Through His sages, He told us that not only there's a lot more water above us. Now, in the time that the written Torah was written, was about 3,300 years ago. At the same time, we're also given something called an oral Torah. The oral Torah is something that everyone has a problem with, unless they're religious. Why? Because most people that are not religious don't actually know what it is, and they think that just a bunch of rabbis wrote it, and they argued amongst each other, and it's their own opinions. That's not necessarily true, because the entire oral Torah is something that was given to us at the same time the written Torah was given to us, but we were not allowed to write it. We're only allowed to write it about 1,500 or 1,600 years ago. In this oral Torah, one of the main ways we understand and know that it's real is because part of the oral Torah is something called a codex. The codex is a way for us to learn and know how to read the written Torah. Meaning that without the oral Torah, we wouldn't even know how to read the written Torah. So for example, in English, we have a vowel system. We have A, E, I, O, U. And every word has a base. It has to have one of these 5 letters. You cannot have any word in the English alphabet without one of these letters. Whether it's, dad, or mom, or it's electrocution, or it's anything else. It's food, or it's pizza. Anything else. Everything has to have one of those letters. At least one. Most words have more than one. In the Hebrew language, the holy language, we don't have letters that are vowels. We have something called nikud. Nikud is these little dots that you see on the letters sometimes. Now, if you've been to the shul, and you see they read from the scroll 3 times a week, on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, you see that the scroll they read from doesn't have dots. Because we're not allowed to have dots on that scroll. But we are allowed to have dots in the books. But the only way we can know what the one that the scroll is saying is by already knowing what's written in the book. So that's why every time someone trains to learn how to read the scroll, they have to train from a book, not necessarily from a scroll first, because they have to know what these words are. So, how valuable is this vowel system? So imagine I gave you a word, I told you to say Moses. But write Moses without vowels. You can't. If you take out the O and the E, what do you have? You have MS. MS is miss. It's a completely different word. It's not a name. It's not anything. It's a description. Moses is actually a person. So if I told you to just say Moses, but without the vowels, it would be impossible. Same concept with Hebrew. Without the oral Torah, without this codex, which is one part of the oral Torah, that means that there would not be a written Torah. It would be completely illegible. We would not know what it says. No, not even one sentence. So when people tell you, whether they're Jewish people that don't believe, or don't want to believe, or it's Christians, or anyone else, they tell you, no, we believe in this written Torah, but we don't believe in the oral Torah. That's complete nonsense. Because they cannot understand the written Torah without the oral Torah. They just think that they can. So that's one thing. The second thing is, about the oral Torah, is the fact that every single commandment that God gave us in the written Torah was not given with full details, with a full description of how to do it. So for example, when He gave us the 10 commandments, He told us the 4th commandment, after the first 3, He told us to have one God, not to have any other gods, not to worship idols, not to use His name in vain. But the 4th commandment was to observe the Sabbath. Okay, how do you observe the Sabbath? Is it a pet? Is it some type of game? What's the Sabbath? How do you know what the Sabbath is? How do you observe something? We don't have the details in the written Torah. The details of how to observe the Sabbath, that's the 4th commandment, which obviously shows you how important it is, because it's right next to the one of don't have any other gods. So it's not like it's the 37th commandment and you could say, you know what, it's not really that important. There's don't have any don't worship any idols, and keep the Sabbath. And then after that it's respect your parents, and then after that it's don't murder. Which in essence, this is in the order of importance. So obviously if you believe in more than one God, then the Torah is not relevant to your life. Right? If you're using God's name in vain, and obviously you don't respect God, so Torah is not relevant to your life. You can't have a connection to Him. If you have an idol, then obviously you don't believe in God. So again, the Torah is not relevant to your life. So the first 3 are obviously the most important. Right? So He's saying the 4th one is the Sabbath, and the 6th one is murder. Do not murder. Which based on God, not me, I didn't write the Torah, He didn't ask my permission, I promise you. He wrote it. He says that violating the Sabbath is actually worse than murdering somebody. That's beyond our logic. And if we could understand His logic, we would be Him. Because anytime you're going to judge someone, for example, if you ever have a competition, let's say there's a debate, and in school, and the little kids have a spelling bee, right? They have a spelling bee, and every kid spells all of these words that no one ever uses, but nonetheless, they have this spelling bee. Now, the judges, at the very least, need to be at the same level as the people they're judging. Because if the judges don't know how to read, how are they going to judge people that are spelling things? Right? So for us to judge Him and determine whether He's right or wrong, whether He's fair or not, whether we agree with Him or not, that means that we have to at the very least be at His same level. Now, if you believe in a creator, then obviously already, automatically, you believe that there's no such thing as being at the same level as the creator, because if you believe in a creator, then that means he's superior to you. So, in this very same Torah, he told us that some information in the oral Torah about this water above the water that's here. So there's the literal translation is what I just read to you. Let it separate between water and water. But then the oral Torah, which this part is called the Gemara, talks about what does it mean water above water? Where is this other water? And how could this water that's so important, how come we can't see it? During this time that this is written, this is 3,300 years ago, and then the oral Torah is written almost 1,500 or 1,600 years ago. We can't see any of this stuff. So when we told the rest of the world that there's not only a lot more water over there than here, but it's extremely important for our existence, they laughed at us. Now, in the 1600s, there was a person by the name of Galileo Galilei who came up with the telescope. He realized that everything we knew until that point was fake, meaning that we thought until that point we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 to 800 stars, because that's all we can see with our naked eye. That's all we can do. We can look at the sky without the pollution, and we can see 800 stars. That's what we thought there is. We can see 800 stars. That's all there is. Just like people only thought that the only land that was available was what they can see. That as soon as the water reached the horizon, we would fall over. Eventually, when somebody sailed over, and they realized that it was false. Same thing with the stars. So then he came up with a telescope, and he saw that there are at least thousands of stars. We develop it a little bit more, and then we see there's millions of stars. We fast forward about 400 years, and NASA came up in 1994 with an estimate, which is 10 to the 21st power, which is 1 with 21 zeros after it. And then 10 years later, it was a little bit of a better telescope in Australia that came up with a better number, which 10 to the 19th power. Okay, 1 with 19 zeros. The interesting thing is that this very same oral Torah that everyone has a problem with, that everyone says it's fake, that everyone says that a bunch of rabbis wrote, and it's their opinion, not only has the answer to this question well before all of these telescopes came, but they actually have an exact number. It's 1064340 and then 12 zeros, which pretty much is 10 to the 18th power. So when we came up with this number, when we showed it to the world that we have the exact number of stars in the entire universe, is this 1 with 18 zeros after it approximately, everyone laughed at us because they saw 800 stars. Even when they came up with a telescope, they only saw a few million stars. So all of this time, they're mocking us for being wrong, according to them, only to eventually come closer and closer to the number that we already had. And the only way we were able to get it is from the person, from the thing that put it there. Because we can't obviously count or use that type of number. So this very same thing, this very same God, this very same Creator, told us that the water that's above this water is not only more significant, but it's still. It doesn't move, like the ocean here. And as we develop these telescopes, we realize that there's something called a shooting star. You guys ever see a shooting star? It's pretty, right? Now for many years people thought, that the shooting star is a broken star. It just broke. It's falling off the sky. Poor star. Fell. What can you do? But after a little bit of time, we realized that the shooting star is not broken at all. All it is just one really big ball of ice called a comet. And at the very moment it looks like a shooting star, it's actually melting because it's passing in a direct ray with the sun. So it's melting at a very, very high pace. So the shooting part, the part that you see as the track, is actually water. So now we see that there is obviously a possibility of this water somewhere else. And then the telescope developed a little bit more, and we saw that the entire outer horizon of the universe is one giant piece of ice that these comets break off of, little by little. Each one of these comets is 1 billion kilograms, 1 billion tons actually. which is giant. So when we had something like 30,000 pounds hit the earth in the early 1900s, in 1908, it hit it somewhere in Russia, and until this day, or over 100 years later, nothing can grow on that land. And that's just a small, tiny little piece. So this shows us that not only do we have more water above this water, but it's been here all along, and the only one that could have known this is the one that put it there. Moving forward into the fourth day is when God says that He created the sun and the moon. So first, before He actually tells us the details of what He's going to create, He's giving us the reason of why He's creating. ויאמר אלוהים, יהי מאורות ברכי השמיים להבדיל בין היום ובין הלילה, והיו לאותות ולמועדים ולימים ולשנים. So God said, let there be luminaries in the firmament of the heaven to separate between the day, and the night, and they shall serve as signs for the festivals and for the days and years. So the first question is, why do I need all these signs? I don't have any people yet. I don't have any people. He's telling us that he's putting these lights, which we'll find out shortly that it's the moon and it's the sun and the stars. But He's putting it there specifically to serve as a sign for us to be able to know when there are festivals, which in so many words is holidays. Who's the holiday for? He hasn't created man yet. That's only in the sixth day. This is one clear proof that the only purpose of man is to follow what the Torah says. Why? Because if God, even before He created man, He already told you that you're going to have holidays. And later in the Torah, He's telling you which holidays He's talking about. He's talking about Yom Kippur, which is coming up. He's talking about Rosh Hashanah, which is coming up even sooner. He's talking about Passover. He's talking about Shavuot, which is where we got the Torah. Passover is when we left Egypt. Sukkot is when we're supposed to celebrate the fact that we got the Torah. So He's telling, this is just the first few days. He hasn't talked about the holidays. He hasn't even created man. But He's already telling you that He's creating everything with one single purpose. A connection to Him. You have to observe these holidays. So when someone tells you, okay, you know what, like the Greeks, for example, a couple thousand years ago, the Greeks said, you know what, yes, we believe in God, but He left. He created everything, and then He decided to leave. He doesn't need us. Why would God care if I do a blessing on this pizza? Why would God care if I wrap this strange leather thing around my arm every day? Why would God care if I drive on the Sabbath or not? Why would God care how often I'm with my wife? Whether it's the entire month, or only a few days out of the month, half the month approximately. Why would God care? He's telling you that before I created you, I'm already telling you I cared. Because the only way that you can connect to me is by following these instructions. He's telling you, I already put these instructions, this Torah, I already put it before you. Technically, the Old Torah tells us that the Torah itself was created 974 generations before the world. This is just a small indication of that. So after this, he's saying, ויעש אלוהים את שני המאורות הגדולים, את המאור הגדול לממשלת היום, ואת המאור הקטן לממשלת הלילה, ואת הכוכבים. So we talked about the sun. Now he's telling us that he's creating a big light and a small light. In addition to the small light, there is stars. So Chazal tells us, the sages tell us, why did God create the stars? We understand why He created the moon. We understand why He created the sun. Initially, He says that He created two big lights, but then He changes it. He says, I created two big lights, but then one of them is a big light, and one of them is a small light, which means that initially, both of them were the same size. So what happened? Well, it didn't work out. The construction company didn't finish the job. What happened? So the sages explained to us that initially these two lights, everything in life is controlled by some type of angel that God created. So the sun has an angel that controls it. The moon has an angel that controls it. The grass has an angel that controls it. Everything and anything has something that controls it. All of these soldiers that Hashem created, that God created. Hashem, by the way, means the name, because His name is so holy that you're not allowed to say it. So Hashem said that everything I created has somebody that I put in charge. Now initially, these two big angels, the sun and the moon, were the same. There was same power, same size, same light. But the moon said to God, listen, there can't be two kings in the sky. Just give one of us the crown. So God said, since you're the one that mentioned it, I'm going to make you smaller because you showed pride, and I'll make the sun bigger. This is one of the first lessons we learned from God, is how much He hates pride. But then we also learn mercy from Him in this very same story, because after He saw that the moon doesn't feel too happy about the fact that He just minimized it, He gave it stars as a gift to make it feel better, because eventually when the Messiah comes, it's written that it's going to get its original light. What else can we learn from the sun and the moon? None of us are going to become employees of NASA anytime soon. So what else can we learn from the sun and the moon? We have to try to relate everything that we're learning today, not only to a knowledge of God, but also related to our life. If you notice, the sun is how the moon gets its light, right? The sun, the ray of the sun goes on the moon, and that's how it gets its light. Which in essence means that the sun always faces the beautiful part of the moon. And this is one thing we can learn from that, is how to have a successful marriage. If the husband is always going to look at the dark side of the wife, it's not going to be such a happy marriage. But if the husband finds a way to always see the pretty side of his wife, just like the sun sees the moon, then we got ourselves a chance. After this, we also learn one thing about Judaism, is that every single day, the first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, every time at the end of each day it says, Vayi Erev, Vayi Boker, Yom Revi, or Yom Shlishi, or Yom Chamishi. It says, and it was evening and it was morning, and then it says the number of the day. Why doesn't it say, and it was morning and then it was evening? Because for us, our day starts in a day, and our night is night. But based on Judaism, the day actually starts at night. That's why every time that you go to shul and they say, oh, it's Rosh Chodesh, which is the beginning of a month, or the holiday just started, it never starts in the morning. It starts at night. Technically, based on Judaism, the day starts at night. And we know this from the first parasha, because he says, and it was evening and it was morning. Morning comes second. Why? Because based on God, technically we're supposed to start at night. After that, it answers a very, very big question. A big question that I used to have before I became religious, before I started learning Torah. I had one question that very few people knew the answers to, even though it's within the first few pages. Just because someone has a beard doesn't mean that they know Torah. Osama bin Laden also had a beard. He didn't know Torah. A lot of terrorists that blow themselves up don't know Torah, but they have a beard also. Some people even have hats. They don't know Torah. You know if somebody knows Torah based on how they communicate the information, if they're sure, if they show you sources. So one of the big questions that every little kid has, what about the dinosaurs? What about the dinosaurs? I don't remember reading anywhere in the Torah when I was a little kid that any teacher told me, and King David fought with the dinosaur, and Moses almost got stepped on by a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And Pharaoh was really scared of the dinosaurs. No one mentions the dinosaurs. They're kind of too big to miss them, right? Especially now we have archaeological evidence. We have bones everywhere. We have whole structures. We have a nice museum everywhere. Probably in almost every major city has a dinosaur museum. ויברא אלוהים את התנינים הגדולים ואת כל נפש החיה הרומסת אשר שרצו המים למיניהם. And God created the great sea giants and every living being that creeps. Now, the English translation of Taninim Agdolim is sea giants. The correct translation, a tanin, is a lizard. What are dinosaurs? Lizards. And not only lizards, they're big. What's the word for big? Gadol. So not just regular lizards, they're big ones. So this answered that question. Then you will read a few other places in it. Oral Torah, it tells you the details. And there's a lot of details about it as far as it's much more than just these two words. But God didn't put even one extra letter in the written Torah. Every single letter that's in the written Torah is there specifically. It cannot, if a Torah scroll that you have in the Bet Knesset is missing one letter, it's no longer considered holy. It's no longer considered a Sefer Torah. One letter. Why? Because it was given to us by a divine being, which means that it's divine, which means that it cannot have any errors. Once it has even a single error, it's no longer divine, it's human. And human and divine have nothing to do with each other. We don't think like him, we don't look like him, we don't act like him. The next thing after this that he tells us is that he created the fish. The fish is by far one of the best proofs of God in the Torah that there is, because you can check it out yourself. It's very easy to check. Later on in the Torah, God tells us that there are certain types of fish that we're allowed to eat, and there are certain types of fish that we're not allowed to eat. Now, how can we tell the difference? He gives us a sign. He says there are going to be fish that have fins and scales. If they have both fins and scales, you're allowed to eat them. If they only have fins, you're not allowed to eat them. And then comes the oral Torah, the part that no one wants to agree with, the part that no one wants to believe, the part that no one thinks is divine, and says to us a big secret. God also told us that there will never be, ever, even including any mutations, even including any scientific experiments, even including everything from the beginning of the world until the end of the world, there will never be a single fish with just scales and no fins. You will find fish that have fins, but no scales, but you will never find a fish with just scales and no fins. So anyone that wants to say, you know what, I don't want to believe in the Torah, I don't want to do what God says, I don't want to keep the Sabbath, I don't want to keep kosher, I don't want to do anything. I want to live my life like the monkeys. I want to live my life like the hippies. I want to do whatever I want. I don't want these rules. All they need to do is prove the Torah wrong once. If they can prove the Torah is not divine, they can do whatever they want. And all the Jews will join them too. Once we know the Torah is not divine, we don't have to listen to it anymore. We get to Shemayim, God says, listen, the Torah was real. Yeah, but say, God, there was a mistake. Oh, you're right. It's not divine anymore. If that's the first mistake, we don't know if there's another mistake. But as long as there's no mistake, then it stays divine. So that means that if anyone ever found one fish, discovered one fish with just scales and no fins, that would be officially the first mistake in the Torah. Why? Because it means that the one who wrote it made a mistake. So the fact that no one out of over 2 million species that we have, that we know of right now, no one has ever been able to discover anything like that. Even more so, even when scientists tried with all the mutations and experiments that they do, they tried doing it, they have not succeeded and will never succeed. Which means that whoever said this, for now we're still calling him God or Hashem, not only had to know at least all of the 2 million species that we know of today, but also had to be in control of them, in control of what comes to the world and what doesn't. It's not just having knowledge of them, it's not just superior knowledge, but it's also superior ability. He would decide if it could come to the world or not. And once he decreed that there will never be such a fish, that became a law, and that's again one of the best proofs that you see every single day. The second thing is, we'll see in this book, which anyone that waits till the end, I'll give you guys a copy of this book for free. It's a phenomenal book. It's written by Rabbi Zamir Cohen. It was called originally the coming revolution. Then they changed the name, to Science Comes of Age. In so many words, what this is a book that accumulates scientific knowledge that we've accumulated over the years from scientists, not Jews. Some of them are Jews, obviously, but many aren't. And showing that whatever scientific knowledge they have, we already have in our Torah. When God gave us the Torah, He told us that there's nothing new under the sun. Meaning that everything and anything you want, including today's Shiur, if you can, it's very deep to get to that point, but the point is, including today's conversation, including the future, including the past, including every creation that ever existed and still exists, or existed in the past and doesn't exist. Every single thing that ever existed is actually in this book somehow or some way. You have to know how to find it, obviously. So how do we know that this Torah is so divine? We can just look at what it says, and we can easily find one after another. You start seeing things that are just not human. For example, the knowledge of the stars. Another example was the fish. Now we're going to find an example about the animals. God told us when He created the animals that there are only a certain type of animals that we're allowed to eat. Only a certain type of animals are considered pure animals that we're allowed to eat if we kill them the right way, if we slaughter them the right way. Now in Judaism, a cow or a sheep or a deer has to be slaughtered. We cannot shoot them in the head, we can't electrocute them, we can't torture the animal. Why do we slaughter them? Because the slaughter, if you do it the kosher way, is the only way that the animal would not suffer for even 1 second. So if you tell this to someone who doesn't know anything about slaughtering, he's going to tell you that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You cut the animal's neck, it's blood, it's moving, it's shaking, seems like it's a lot more painful than shooting it. Seems like it's a lot more painful than injecting it, right? So with this rule, God told us that there's only certain type of animals that we can use. So for example, there's the cow, or there's the sheep. And then He told us 4 animals that can never be kosher. The pig, the camel, the herrings, and the rabbit. Now the sign for these animals to be kosher, there's about 10 animals that are kosher, is that they have to chew their cud, which is pretty much eat, swallow, regurgitate it up, chew it again, and then swallow it again. In so many words. The second thing is that they have to have split hooves. They have to have a split in their hooves. So He said all of these kosher animals, all of these pure animals that you're allowed to slaughter the kosher way, have to have both of these signs. The animals that you're not allowed to do it either have none of the signs, usually will have none of the signs, but there are 4 specific animals that have only one sign, and you're not allowed to eat them. This again means that of all the animals, out of over 2 million species, the one who said this had to have knowledge of all of them, including all mutations and everything else. So He told us that of all of these animals, there can only be 4 that have one sign. Everyone else would either have both signs or nothing. Again, anyone that wants to prove the Torah wrong, find another one. Find one other animal that either chews its cud or have a split hoof. The pig has a split hooves. The rabbit, the herrings, and the camel chew their cud but don't have split hooves. So this again could not come from a rabbi, it could not come from me, could not come from any human being.
What happened to a horse?
Horse doesn't have any sign. He has 0. So, not kosher. Pretty animal though. A giraffe is kosher. If you know how to slaughter it. If you know how to find a vein. So now there's something even more amazing that we found out through science recently, is that not only are these, let's just call it 10 animals that we're allowed to eat, that are the only ones that have these 2 signs. Not only are the only ones that we're allowed to butcher the right way, they're also the only 10 that we can butcher the right way. Meaning that the most important part of slaughtering the animal, the kosher way, is that the animal cannot suffer for even 1 second. One thing we know about the human body or the animal body is that, in essence, without our, in order to, for example, to determine if someone died, it's not if their heart stopped. It's only if their brain wave stopped. If someone's heart stopped, you could still bring them back to life. But if someone's brain stopped, they're considered clinically dead. Whereas if someone's heart stopped, it's not considered clinically dead. Which means that the moment blood stops reaching the brain, whatever species it is, whether it's human or animal, it's considered dead. It's no longer receiving any blood, it can no longer function. So in order for us to have pain, we have to be alive, first of all, right? And second of all, we have to keep getting this blood. So now, the beauty of these 10 animals is that they have something very, very different about them than all the other animals, including the horse you mentioned before. Every animal, including the human body, we have 2 veins, at the very minimum, 2 veins that connect us from the heart to the brain. 2 veins. Meaning that if, let's say, for example, a horse, if you cut the vein on the bottom, there's still going to be blood reaching the brain from the vein on the top of the head. So that means that until the blood empties out, he's still technically alive. And if he's still technically alive, he's suffering. Even if it's for 5 seconds, even if it's for 1 minute, however long it takes, as long as he's alive, he's suffering. So the pig, the horse, the camel, everything else, except the kosher animals that God told us which ones they are, the ones that have the 2 signs, have these 2 veins. The kosher animals, which you see a picture in this book, it's on page 154, have something very, very unique. They also have the 2 veins. But right before they reach the brain, right as they reach the neck, they connect into a single tube. Which means that when the butcher cuts that tube, it's all circulation. All blood ceases to reach the brain instantly. By the time the remaining blood that's there reaches the brain, the animal has already lost consciousness and obviously does not feel any pain. So the next question is, how is it possible that the animal still moves? If you ever seen, I saw it unfortunately when I was a little kid. We went on Passover. For some strange reason, my dad decided that it was a good idea to take us to watch the Rabbi slaughter a sheep. So I still have nightmares till this day.
I
feel bad for the animal. But anyway, it was an experience nonetheless, which actually helped me later on in life. But you see the animal move after the rabbi cuts it. You see the animal's legs move, but that we know is nerves. That's nerves. It has nothing to do with whether the animal's alive or not. That's even hours later, it would still do that and eventually stop. That's just nerves that are in the body. The other thing now that we know that the fish obviously has something special, the animals are something special, and somehow we connect all of this to kosher. So the first thing that somebody tells me when I tell them, listen, keeping kosher is very, very critical if you want to get closer to God. According to the Torah, according to the sages, in order for someone to even understand Torah, they have to eat kosher. Meaning that if someone is not eating kosher, it makes it very difficult for them to accept the Torah. Even if I give you the best proofs in the world, it still will be difficult for you to absorb it. It doesn't mean that someone's stupid. It means that their neshama, their soul, is being blocked by something that's impure. The Torah is something spiritual, it's something pure. Something pure must go to something else that's pure. If there is a wall, obviously it's going to have a difficult time. So then he also gives us a rule about birds. And this actually also applies to animals as well. In order for a bird to be kosher bird, it cannot, one major sign is that it cannot be a bird that eats other living flesh. Can't be an eagle that eats rabbits and rats and cats and whatever else they can fit in its mouth. It can't be a carnivore. What does God care if I eat a chicken or an eagle? They kind of look the same, just bigger wings. What does he care? He says because a blood, adam or nefesh. The blood is the soul. Meaning, everything that you eat turns into blood. Whatever doesn't turn into blood leaves your body. Which means that you are what you eat. That famous statement, you are what you eat. But in Torah language, it's literally, you are what you eat. Meaning that if you eat an animal, or a bird, or any type of species that's vicious, that kills, it will give you that nature. That's why you see some of the worst people on earth were very, very avid eaters of pig. Aside from being a filthy animal, it's also a vicious animal. But again, one of the things that God told us is that if you eat the birds and the animals that are technically not eating other animals, then you're bringing something that's compassionate into your heart. You're bringing something that's merciful into you. And that's actually some of the signs of being Jewish. Someone that's not compassionate or merciful, you have to question whether they're really Jewish or not. Seriously. This is actually what the sages tell us. I'm not telling you myself. Anytime I bring my opinion, I'll tell you it's my opinion. This is not my opinion. So far, I haven't told you my opinion. So, when we eat a bird that eats other birds, or we eat a lion that eats other zebras or whatever else that he eats, we in essence take on its nature. So now, there was one time a rabbi called Rabbi Meir, very famous, Rabbi Meir Balanes, the Rabbi Meir, the miracle worker, they called him. He performed different miracles. He was known as the miracle worker. Now his wife, her name was Buria. B-R-U-R-I-A. Something like that. And she was not only a righteous person, but she knew more Torah than most of the sages. And she would battle them. She would debate them. So she comes to Rabbi Meir one time and she says, listen, God said that everything that he told us that we're not allowed to do, for example, everything that he created in the world, whatever we're not allowed to eat, he gave us a replacement with the same exact taste. Meaning that there's, just by doing God's will, you never lose. There's no such thing as ever doing what God said and you lose out. Because that's what people think initially. Listen, if I tell them, listen, eating kosher is very important, I tell them, oh, I really like eating pork. I really like eating bacon. I really like eating shrimp. I really like eating all of these other things. No one is saying they're not tasty. We're saying it's not allowed. But there's a replacement. God said that you'll never ever lose out by doing His will. So the first thing she says, okay, I want to eat something that has the similar taste to bacon. And it's actually a fish that still exists. It's called shibuta. Shibuta is a fish. It's found somewhere around in Africa, in the African waters over there. It has the same exact identical taste to bacon. This is just one small example of how if someone really liked bacon, there is another way to get it, in a kosher way. There was one time this rabbi had this parrot. And this is a real story. This happened literally within maybe the last 15, 20 years or less. He had this parrot. And, the parrot hears religious stuff in the house. One day the parrot flies out and gets lost. Somebody finds him. And keeps the parrot. Doesn't return it to the rabbi. He doesn't know where it's from. He keeps the parrot. And he notices that on Friday night, the parrot starts saying, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. This is a strange parrot saying Shabbat Shalom. Okay. After a couple of months, he goes and he finds the rabbi and he brings back the parrot. And the rabbi sees this guy, he goes, oh, you found my parrot. He goes, no, I've actually had him for a couple of months. So what made you decide to bring this parrot back? He goes, well, after he made me keep Shabbat, I decided it's time for me to do tshuva and give you back the bird. The same exact bird was actually stolen one time. And the guy that stole it also brought back the bird because it also made him keep Shabbat. Because they both figured that if this bird knows what Shabbat is, it doesn't really know, but it knows, then obviously we should know too. There was a funny joke about a parrot. One time this guy has this parrot, and every day he sees this old man passing, and the same old man, he says, oh, you're ugly, you're ugly, you're ugly. The old man gets really angry, knocks on the door, he goes, come on, you tell your bird to stop. He goes, okay, I'll tell it to stop, I'll tell it to stop. The next day, the guy passes, oh, you're ugly, you're ugly, you're ugly. The guy is taking an offense, come on, again, I told the guy, he goes, knocks on the door. Please, stop, it's not nice, it makes me self-conscious. So the owner comes to the bird and he says, listen, if you tell the guy again that he's ugly tomorrow, I'm going to kill you. So the next day, the guy passes and the bird whistles to him, hey, you. And the guy says, what do you want? He goes, you know, so why are you asking? So what do we know from this? What do we know from the story? What do we learn from the story? Is everything you could learn something important from even from a joke. The truth will always be the truth. He was ugly. No matter what he does, even if he stops the parrot. Also, there was another story about a parrot, another funny story about a parrot. One time there was a guy came to a store and he sees the first parrot, $1,000. Wow, it's a beautiful parrot. Sees the one right next to it, it's $10,000. So they look exactly the same. So he asks the owner, what's the difference between these two parrots? They're the same exact size, same shape, same everything. He goes, well, this one is $1,000, a standard parrot. The one that's $10,000, he knows the entire Chumash, the entire 5 books of Moses by heart. Wow, that's a parrot. So he keeps looking, he sees another one, same exact one, $25,000. Come on, no, why are you trying to hustle us here? What does this one know that the other one doesn't know? He goes, oh, this one not only knows the 5 books of Moses, he knows the entire Gemara, the entire oral Torah. Wow, what a parrot. And then he sees in the back, there's a quiet parrot, looks like everyone, $150,000. What could this one possibly know? This one knows the written Torah. The other one knows the oral Torah. What else is there to know? He goes, I don't know what he knows, but I know that the other two call him Kvod Harav. Rabbi. They call him Rabbi.
They have to what you say now? The neighbors that they have. Yeah, right there.
What is it?
The neighbors right here, but they don't talk.
Yeah, I actually saw them. Actually, every time I pass by, it jumps up. The white one. Yeah, I remember. You're right.
But the Jews know.
They don't know the Torah. That parrot doesn't know the Torah. So the next thing is, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. This particular verse, Vayomer Elohim naaseh adam b'tzalmenu kedmutenu v'yirdu b'imgat hayam. This particular verse, this first half of the verse, is one of the most troubling verses in the entire Torah. When God told Moses to write the Torah in Mount Sinai, he told him exactly each letter what to put. So when Moses got to this verse, he asked God, there's only one of you. So why are you saying, let us make man in our image? Let us make man in our likeness. Our is plural. There's more than one God? Of course there's not more than one God. So why are you saying, let's make it in our? So God says, write it. He says, but God, people are going to think, they're going to use this as an excuse to say that it's they have a reason to believe in more than one God. So God says, write it. The ones that want to sin, they're always going to find an excuse. the ones that are not looking for an excuse will understand why I wrote it. One of the biggest lessons that I'm trying to teach man is that even for his creation, for creating him, despite me being perfect, despite me being supreme and divine and superior to everything, I wanted to give the angels, which I created before man, a little bit of significance, to make them feel good, to make them feel like they're partners. And I asked their opinion. What do they think? Should I create man? Should I not create man? So when I created man, I said, let it create man in our image. To explain to you that I used their guidance. Not that he needed it, but just as a lesson to us that anyone that's ever going to make a big decision, it's very, very important for them to get guidance of some kind. It's not good to be alone. This is an important verse because a lot of people that are atheists use this verse as if it's a mistake. And people that believe in Christianity or Catholicism use it as a justification to the Trinity, believing that God is three parts. Now obviously if they read the interpretation, it's very simple to understand why. But God's insisted on putting this verse. He obviously could have changed this verse. This is the only place in the Torah where it says God in plural. But he insisted on putting it because he also wanted to teach us that anyone that wants to do what he says will find a very easy way to do what God says. Anyone that's looking for an excuse will always find an excuse of why not to do it. There was one time a big sage called Magid Miduvna. Magid Miduvna was a giant, big, very holy man. And some of his students came to him and they said, Rabbi, during the month of Elul, we're really supposed to repent as Jewish people because Rosh Hashanah is coming up. And it's not like the Christians or the Catholics that have Rosh Hashanah that's Happy New Year and fireworks. It's not a Happy New Year. Hopefully we have a Happy New Year, but in essence, what Rosh Hashanah is Judgment Day. It's the day Hashem opens the books and he sees, what have you done? Is it worth it for him to keep you here for another year? Is it worth it for him to make you richer? Is it worth it for him to make you poorer? Is it worth it for him to decide on anything in your life? It's a big day. Which means that the preceding days, the preceding month approximately, or 40 days, are very, very important. They're the times we're supposed to repent. All of us make sins. There's no such thing as a person that doesn't make a sin. So all of us are supposed to prepare for this one day. So that's what we do during the month of Elul. Someone that ate non-kosher, someone that violated Shabbat, someone that cheated on their wife, someone that cheated on their husband, someone that cheated on their boss, someone that cheated on customers, someone that did anything. On purpose, unintentional, everyone sins. The key is to start our repentance before the judgment day. Why? Because just like if you have a big trial, if you have a big trial, you're either going to lose everything or make everything. You're not going to get ready the day of the trial. You're going to get ready beforehand. You're going to prepare your case. You're going to get the facts. You're going to prove this guy's a liar. You're going to prove that guy's saying the truth. You're going to prove this is the evidence. You're going to work at it. Same thing with God. So the rabbi has these students and he's saying, what happens, God? There's more right here. You can have some more. Oh, I thought you were eating the pizza.
You want some?
No. So the rabbi has these students and they're saying, God, what about these people that don't wake up during Elul? They don't repent. They don't think it's a big deal. So the rabbi says, I'm going to tell you a parable. Every time you ask the Magid Miduvna a question, he would always give you a parable. He'll tell you a story to explain the point. So one time someone asks him, why do you say so many parables? He goes, let me tell you a parable. So anyway, he says one time there was a guy there was an exporter that his trade was to transfer illegal goods from one country to another. He had a driver that would, control the horses in the carriage, and he would give him the goods. The driver would take the goods to this other country or other city, bring the money and so on. Now the exporter himself was worried from the minute he gave him the goods, from the minute he gave him the merchandise, he was worried. Because he knew that if they caught him, it's illegal. Not only is he going to lose all this money, but he's probably going to tell on him. And he's going to go to jail for 20, 30 years, maybe even get the death penalty in those days. It's a problem. He was worried from the first day. The driver wasn't worried from the first day. When did he become worried? He became worried as soon as he got to the border. During the drive, he's hanging out, he's smoking a cigarette, he's drinking, he's hanging out, he's enjoying himself. As soon as he gets to the border, he starts thinking, oh, wait a minute, they're not going to believe my story, that this is not mine. They're going to blame me also, they're going to think I knew it. Starts thinking, he starts becoming worried. So who's the only one that didn't worry in this story? The horses. So the Magid from Duvna says, that's the nation of Israel. The righteous, he's like this exporter. He's worried from day one. As soon as Elul starts, he's worried because he's already thinking about what sins did I make. Do I remember all of my sins? Did I do this? Did I do that? If God is so perfect and He expects me to be better, He's not expecting me to be perfect, but He expects me to be better. I have to improve. So he's arguing with himself. He's worried. What's going to happen on this judgment day? The driver is the one that's not worried during Elul. The driver is only worried on Rosh Hashanah. As soon as he gets to Rosh Hashanah, they tell him, hey, listen, Rosh Hashanah is the day that God decides your fate this coming year. As soon as he knows what's the significance, he becomes worried. The horses is unfortunately the rest of us. We're not worried at all. We're not worried during an old. We're not worried in Rosh Hashanah. Some people don't even go to Beit Knesset on Rosh Hashanah because they don't have a connection. They don't know that it's real. And as I said in the beginning of this Shiur, there are only two types of people that don't follow the religion, either because they don't believe or they don't know. Very, very rarely will you find someone that does it on purpose. It's uncommon. And I would probably say that there's probably maybe if that much, maybe a handful of people in the entire world that don't do it on purpose, meaning don't do it on purpose with knowledge. There are many people, unfortunately, that are Jewish, that are anti-religion, that hate the religion. There's actually even people that spend their money and their time going against the religion. But they're not doing it based on knowledge. They're doing it based on lack of knowledge. If someone told you, listen, Sabbath is very, very important. Okay, great. Important to you, not important to me. If someone told you the consequences of not keeping the Sabbath, that makes it a little bit more important. Someone told you more details of the consequences of not keeping the Sabbath. Each time you learn more and more about it, deciding whether to keep it or not, whether to observe it or not, becomes a little easier. The more knowledge we have, the easier it is for us to move on with our life and get closer to Hashem. The problem is that we also have something that God gave us in creation, which is the evil inclination. Some people call it Satan, some people call it evil inclination, some people call it devil, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter. Easiest way is evil inclination. Why? Because it's within us. It's not just some cartoon figure that's out there. It's something that's within us. Something that's going to motivate us to do the opposite of what we're supposed to do. The best part about this evil inclination is that it's always going to give us a rational excuse. Oh, listen, if I observe the Sabbath, that means I can't work. If I can't work, I won't make money. If I won't make money, I won't be able to send my kids to yeshiva. So I should sacrifice myself to let my kids go to yeshiva. That's the evil inclination. There's no such thing as a mitzvah that's allowed to be done through a sin. There was one time a student that told the rabbi, listen, I'm having a hard time coming to the yeshiva on time. Maybe you can give me a break. The rabbi says, no breaks. You have to come to yeshiva on time. Everybody comes here at 8 o'clock in the morning. You have to come at 8 o'clock in the morning. The very next day he shows up at 10. The rabbi says, no, what happened? So, Rabbi, I have the evil inclination. It's convincing me. He's fighting me. It's hard for me. The rabbi says, so fight him. Beat him. The next day, kid comes in, even later. He comes in at 1 o'clock. Rabbi says, what happened? I listened to what you said, Rabbi. I actually woke up extra early. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning. Okay, so what happens? Why did you show up at 1 o'clock? Well, the evil inclination, I was fighting it. I beat it. But after I beat it, I was so tired I had to go back to sleep. Someone that wants to sin is always going to find an excuse because the evil inclination is already giving them one. The key is to find a way to beat it. To find a way to fulfill our purpose. The Torah tells us that we're not monkeys, we're not dogs, we're not the people that have no obligations. We obviously have a responsibility. In the first 5 days of creation, we learn enough about this Creator to, at the very least, know for sure that this book had to come from Him. There's enough information just within the first 5 days that's beyond human knowledge. It's beyond human comprehension. I haven't even scratched the surface of all of this. Knowledge is just a small part of it. But a book being, with the set of instructions being so superior, to us, the least we can do is look a little bit more into it. See what else it says. Because one of the reasons why God gave it to us is not only just so we could serve Him, it's for our own benefit. This amazing book tells us how to serve Him, but also tells us how to be happy, tells us how to have successful marriage. Every time we come here, there's a birthday. Baruch Hashem. He's telling us that this book has obviously a lot of interesting rules in it that are going to help our marriage, that are going to help our life, that are going to make us happy. There's a lot of it. The problem is that most of us don't read this book because we don't understand it. So God gave us another set of books. It's called the Oral Torah. And again, we're going to go back and we're going to try to finish the Shiur with maybe a handful of facts that are good to prove the Oral Torah. Most people that have a problem with Judaism, they don't have a problem with the written Torah. They like the story. They like Moses splitting the sea. They like the whole story of the slaves, of us overcoming the Egyptians. They like Adam and Eve. They like the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes, King David. It's all wonderful. It's a nice story. But once it gets to a point where it tells us that we have to have a bunch of rules in our life, we have to dress modestly, we have to eat a certain type of food, we have to act a certain type of way, we have to do these strange things in the morning and at night, prayers, then that's interfering on my life. When God is telling me that I'm not allowed to walk around half naked, I don't like it. When God is telling me that I can't just eat whatever I want, I don't like it. So I'm going to try to prove it wrong. So what do people do? They say, oh, show me a source. Then we show them the source in the written Torah, and they say, oh no, it's not really detailed. The Sabbath, it doesn't really say how to observe it. Kosher, it doesn't say exactly what makes it kosher and what not, other than there's 2 signs. Give me more details. So we have to go to the written Torah, the oral Torah. So then they see a bunch of rabbis' names giving us details of how to do each mitzvah. So the immediate excuse is, no, it's just some rabbi. What if this rabbi is wrong? So God told us, one of the rules of Torah, God told us that we have to listen to these sages. We're not allowed, not allowed to change the rules. The rules that are in the Gemara, the old Torah, that were already written a couple thousand years ago, we're not allowed to add to them. We're not allowed to subtract from them. They are what they are. So the rabbis of today don't add more to what was already written. So when we're referring to rabbis, we're not referring to the rabbis from the local synagogue. We're referring to the sages of a few thousand years ago. So to give us an understanding of who they are, it's easier to get an understanding of their knowledge than who they are. Because if you think that someone is just like you, then immediately you're going to judge them just like you judge yourself. If you think that you're smart, then you're going to judge someone that you think is either as smart or less than you. If you think someone is smarter, then very rarely are you going to judge them based on their intellect. Maybe you'll judge them based on their athletic ability, Maybe you'll judge them based on their looks. Maybe you'll judge them based on anything else, but not based on their intellect. Maybe not based on their knowledge. So some of this knowledge, again, not only is from the sages, but obviously from the source, which is the Creator. Most of us think that this knowledge is from our technology of today, but we have sources in the Torah, and if anyone that wants the pages and the numbers and the books, I can give it to them. I'll actually mention some of them here. One of the things we know is the 1962, somebody came up with mouth-to-mouth, CPR.
And what is about the Machalavi and Basari? Where do you find this? Because we spoke about what you may eat and what you may not
Right,
eat.
milk and meat.
Yeah?
Milk and meat is actually in the written Torah. Milk and meat is in the written Torah 3 times. It says you cannot cook the
The milk of whatever.
Gdi is, I guess, the deer in its mother's milk. Now it's 3 times. Hold on, it's 3 times. Why is the same exact verse? I just told you earlier there's not one extra letter in the Torah. But that specific verse that you're asking about is in the Torah 3 times. Same exact one. Why would you put the same exact sentence in the same Torah 3 times? You just said there's not even one extra letter. 1 time's enough, right? This is to teach us the 3 rules of milk and meat. 1, you're not allowed to cook it. 2, you're not allowed to eat it. 3, you're not allowed to benefit from it. Meaning, obviously you're not allowed to sell it. So if you own, for example, a restaurant that sells cheeseburgers, not allowed to have that. Or on the other hand, if let's say, for example, you're cooking a burger, and instead of a piece of glass dropping on it, a piece of cheese drops on it. You're not allowed to eat the burger. That we already know from the first 2 rules. But also the 3rd rule, when it says you're not allowed to benefit from it, means that you can't even give that burger to your dog. Why can't you give it to your dog? Because technically if you give it to your dog, you'll benefit from it because you don't have to give him as much dog food. That's why that same exact verse is in the Torah 3 times. So not only is there a source for your question in the oral Torah, but there's a source for it in the written Torah 3 times. CPR is another thing that we had given scientists a lot of credit for. It came out in 1962. But CPR actually is something that was already written about over 3,300 years ago when the nation of Israel was in the desert and they sent the spies to see the land of Israel. The sages tell us that as soon as we saw the giants, which it literally says in the Torah, giants, as soon as we saw the giants that were in the land of Israel, which was called Canaan at the time, some of the people passed out. And then they say, how do we bring them back to life? Because they lost air. They got, in essence, they lost control of their body. It says that the ones that stayed up actually gave them mouth to mouth. Something that we call CPR. This, again, is written in a book that was already written 3,000 years ago. We didn't know what CPR was called then. We had a different name for it. Another thing is anesthesia. Anesthesia seems like a medical miracle. Technically it is. Medicine has advanced drastically over the last 200 years, where a couple of 100 years ago, the non-Jews, non-religious, and the ones that were ignorant of Torah knowledge, would kill a lot of patients. Not just from the surgeries themselves, but also from the pain. They would give surgeries, they would try to help people out, but so much blood would leave, so much pain would be handled that it was beyond human capacity and people would die. So then they came up with different ways to give an anesthetic, to give a person the ability to fall asleep and not feel the pain. Obviously medicine has advanced drastically now. Anytime someone has something as simple as a colonoscopy to as much as a heart transplant, you have to have a anesthesia. You go there, they give you a little IV, a few minutes later you fall asleep, you wake up, you're all brand new. At least that's supposed to be the case. So scientists give themselves a big pat on the back for this anesthesia. The problem is that if they would have read the Gemara that was written nearly 2,000 years ago, there was a person by the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the one that wrote the Zohar. His son was very, very fat. Huge. They said that he was so big that him and another person was so big that a bull could pass under them. Walk under them. They were really, really big people. But he was also a very holy person. And one day, somebody offended him and said that, in so many words, to shorten the story, he said that he thinks that he's making a big sin. So Rabbi Elazar took this very personally. He says, people that sin in this world, when they die, what happens to them? The worms eat their body. Worms and maggots eat their body until there's a skeleton. Within about a year, there's nothing left. Technically, the bigger a person is, the more the neshama, the more the soul suffers, even after death, from this big body. But one thing we've discovered is that the really righteous people that have been uncovered, even from a few thousand years ago, some people have uncovered graves, the body does not disintegrate. It stays exactly the same, without being mummified, without anything. This is proof. You can look at it on the internet. There's quite a few proofs of it, of big sages that were uncovered for one reason or another, and they literally look like they died yesterday. No holes, no nothing. So Rabbi Elazar says, I want to see if I'm really righteous or I'm wicked like this person. So I want to take out fat from my body, and I want to see if the worms and maggots and the things of this world are going to eat it. If they eat my flesh, then I know that I've made some sins. That when I die, I'm going to suffer like everybody else. If not, I'm in better shape. So in the Gemara, it tells the exact details of the story. We'll try to save some time because there's a few other facts I want to mention. It gives the exact details of the surgery, of how they put him on a marble table. We know now why marble is very important. Marble doesn't keep all the bacteria. Put him on a marble table. They gave him a potion that put him to sleep. And the Gemara talks about the entire process of the surgery 2,000 years ago. Well, before 1,800 years before anyone got any credit for anesthesia. Long story short, after they took out a couple of buckets full of fat from Rabbi Elazar, they put it outside in the hot weather of Israel for not just a few hours, but for several days. I believe it was actually even as much as a week. And not even one fly landed on his fat, which if you put a steak outside, doesn't matter whether the animal sinned or not, you put a steak outside after 3 hours, it's full of worms. So it gives us an understanding of not only the level of intellect that these sages had, but also their righteousness. The next thing is that if it's also in this book, well, actually even before that, it's in 1881, and then all the way throughout the 1800s, there were many plagues. If you guys remember, there was something called the Black Plague. Black Plague, for anyone who doesn't know, happened because of human error, not anything else. Human error was that the church hated cats. They hated cats, and there was a bunch of cats, so they decided to make a new law: kill all the cats. Anyone that sees a cat must kill the cat. Now what happens when all the cats disappear? All the rats appear. Rats carry disease, hence the Black Plague. So now, the plagues in 1881, scientists realized that there are many diseases that transfer through flies and mosquitoes. Obviously today, every other day, you find out in the news, breaking news, new fly, new mosquito, new disease, new disaster, new reason to be worried. Every day there's something else, whether it's the mad cow, or any other, or the chickens, or anything else. The Gemara already has this in Masechet Ketubot, page 77, the side bet. Rabbi Yochanan says to be careful of flies of the Baal Ha'atan, which the Baal Ha'atan was a form of disease of that day, and asking why should we be careful of flies. He says because the flies transfer disease. Literally, this is not an interpretation, this is not a translation, this is literally what it says. Also has something called opakinon in the Gemara, which is actually in, I believe it's in Masechet Megillah, maybe? I think it's in Masechet Megillah. It talks about wine and how they made wine in those days, and it compares wine to beer. And in so many words, one thing that we discovered about wine is someone that drinks a cup of wine a day, or at least they say a day, it's supposed to be good for their heart. This is written 2,000 years ago in Masechet Megillah. It says that beer is bad for the heart, wine is good for the heart. There's a lot of them. In Masechet Ketubot, they talk about this same Baal Ha'atan, the same thing that we talked about from Rabbi Yochanan. He says, be careful of this Baal Ha'atan, this disease. Now what happens once somebody gets it? You have to have brain surgery. So in Masechet Ketubot, it talks about how they remove these tumors from the brain. Again, it's a couple of thousand years ago. It's the actual discussion of this procedure. It talks about how it requires a precise knife. And they also use something that we don't have today, which is a specific type of lotion that softens the skull in order to make it very easy to cut and not bleed. We don't have that today, but another something that's very, very interesting, that's relevant to everyone's life, because we live in the modern world today and people always think that nothing will ever affect them until it does. Chas v'chalil no alenu, but in the last couple of decades, one of the big diseases that resulted from promiscuity is AIDS. There are different codes, something called Torah codes, which we'll talk about in the next Shiur, that show in the actual written Torah from 3,300 years ago how there are codes of not only that their AIDS would come, but it would come from a monkey. It's actually in the written Torah. But the oral Torah, in Masechet Sotah, says that any place that has a high level of promiscuity will have a plague of germs that destroy the body, the white blood cells. This is by definition what AIDS is. Again, a couple of thousand years ago from the same people that no one wants to agree with. It talks about drug addiction, how Rabbi Chia says to his son not to drink a specific type of drug because he will become addicted to it, and once he becomes addicted to it, he'll always need it, and once he always needs it, he'll always sin. So drug addiction was even around back then. Pregnancy risks. It has the secrets about pregnancy. It has the secrets of when the embryo actually gets its neshama, which is on the 40th day. There is unfortunately a company called Planned Parenthood. I don't know if anyone's heard of them, but they've hit media in recent months. Okay, these sick individuals are in America, and they're selling human body parts from abortions. Now, this is as horrendous as it gets. The reason why they do this is because they don't believe in the Torah. They don't believe that these embryos have life. Now, all they need to do is go to the written Torah, the oral Torah, and they get very, very details. But even if they want something they can see, they can just follow the instructions. The Torah says that the embryo is officially alive, meaning officially gets its neshama on the 40th day. Science has proven that the brain waves of the embryo begin on the 40th day. So, for anyone that's wondering, debating, should I have this baby or not have this baby, anyone that's having this unfortunate dilemma of not knowing that they're supposed to keep and they're not allowed to have abortions, they have to do a little bit of research, just like you'll do research about what job you want, just like you'll do research about what investments you're going to make, just like you'll do research about anything else that's important in your life. It's very important to do some research, because listening to these people that do this is obviously, we now know, is not for our best interest, because they're looking for us to do these things, because they're looking to make more money. This is, unfortunately, the Sodom and Gomorrah that we've reached today, where people make money off of body parts. I know some of this stuff is hard to hear, but it's life. And if we don't address life, we're living an illusion. Last but not least, we have the whole issue of bacteria. Bacteria, obviously everyone knows what bacteria is. Everyone knows or has heard of Louis Pasteur, who lived in the 1800s. He believes that he discovered, and people believe to this day, that he discovered bacteria. And that's why they call pasteurization. You know, milk is pasteurized. It says that the bacteria, you heat it up, in essence, he's gotten a lot of credit for something that technically was written by Rabbi Eliezer the Great in Masechet Derech Eretz in the 7th chapter. It says, a man shall not drink from a cup and then give it to another because of life-threatening dangers. Yeah, Kiddush can also be considered. You're not obligated to give it from one person to another. You can put it in another cup. No obligation to drink from the same cup. It's a cultural thing. But Rabbi Eliezer says, in another place in the Gemara, it says that you are better off in drinking the water of a witch, meaning water that has witchcraft in it, than drinking water of your friend. Because at least one of them you can get rid of. At least the witchcraft you can get rid of. But the bacteria, if it gives you the disease, unfortunately some of these diseases don't have a cure. So far we've gone over the first 5 days or so of creation. There's a lot of things that we can cover. I mean, again, the purpose of today's Shiur is to establish at least a little bit of thought process, a little bit of thinking, a little bit of questioning of ourselves. Whether you're an extreme believer and you've been religious for your whole life, but sometimes have some doubts, or you don't believe in anything. My goal today was to get you to question yourself. Question yourself to the point of whether you believe enough like you thought you did, or if you don't believe, whether you're right. If you're questioning yourself by the end of today, then we succeeded. If we haven't, then please stay and we'll talk a little bit more privately. Be'ezrat Hashem, each one of us will get closer to God through this. Each one of us will get closer to God through this Elul, right before Rosh Hashanah. Maybe try to take good advice of taking something upon ourselves. Whether you're religious or not is irrelevant. Take something upon yourself before the Judgment Day. Whether it's being a little more modest, eating a little bit more kosher, doing tefillin, keeping Shabbat, anything, reading Psalms once a day, praying once a day, anything and everything. Anything that connects you to God for even 2 more minutes. If you can do that during this month, it shows God that at least you care. And if you care at least, then you're giving Him a reason to give you good. If you don't care, then why should He? So Be'ezrat Hashem, we all show enough care. And He shows us how much He cares. Any questions?
Wonderful.